Hi, so you may have heard about climate change denial. Climate change denial is basically the position that you reject what the science has to say about humans influencing climate change. Okay, in particular, the rise in the global mean surface temperature. You're denying that human beings are actually contributing to that change. You usually take up the position that, oh, this is natural, or it's just the way the earth has been and the earth goes through cycles, da da da. This is the science of climatology. If you meet somebody who denies climate change and you get to have an interaction, the first question you should ask is, what is the greenhouse effect? It's the only question you should be asking at this point because it establishes if they really understand what climate change is saying. And to understand what climate change is saying, you have to start at the very bottom, which means the greenhouse effect. So ask them what the greenhouse effect is. And if they do not know what the greenhouse effect is, then ultimately you're in a position to inform them about what the greenhouse effect is. People who deny climate change, many of them have often forgot the basics of what they learned in school about the greenhouse effect. They were taught this one time, they've just forgotten it. So they'll be thinking, do I know it? Do I know it? And they'll be like, oh, I've heard it before, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, that'll be going on in the back of their heads. But you're in a position now to tell them what it is. So what is the greenhouse effect? It's very simple. A good analogy is sleeping under the blanket. If you sleep under the blanket, you're able to trap heat between the blanket and yourself, much like a sleeping bag. That's how it works. A lot of the heat isn't escaping into the room around you or into the environment around you or into the open night. So you stay warm. The best analogy is actually a greenhouse because that's why it's called the greenhouse effect. But anyway, here we go. The greenhouse effect. The sun projects heat onto planet Earth. That heat doesn't just stay on planet Earth. It should be reflected out. However, there is a layer of CO2 around the planet. And this layer of CO2 traps some of the heat, so not all of the heat escapes. And what this allows for is a global mean surface temperature to be held there. Basically, the planet has a temperature. And that temperature is fairly static because of the amount of CO2 that's trapping heat in. Some heat will be reflected into space, but others will be trapped. So that's an important way to convey what the greenhouse effect is to people. If you're inside a greenhouse, heat comes in through the window and the greenhouse traps the heat because not all of the heat is able to escape. Some will, but not all of it. And the temperature inside the greenhouse goes up. Now, once you present that model to people, ask them then, what happens if you decrease the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in that model? Obviously, more heat is going to go out into space. Less heat is going to be trapped. So just point out the greenhouse effect to them and then ask them, what happens if you add more CO2 to the atmosphere? And the answer is more heat has to be trapped. Okay? You're going to be trapping more heat. If you decrease the amount of CO2, you're going to trap less heat. And once it gets into their minds about CO2 amounts and the level of heat that is actually maintained around the planet, they get that the basics of the science is saying you add more CO2 to the atmosphere, then the global mean surface temperature is going to increase. If you remove CO2 from the atmosphere, the amount of global mean surface temperature is going to decrease. Now, just there are ways in which we can talk beyond this about all sorts of different factors going on, like, I don't know, cow farts and volcanic eruption and things like this. But for now, just that simple model is important to get because a lot of people who deny climate change, they forget this basic model of the greenhouse effect. And they actually don't know how CO2 is related to the global mean surface temperature. They don't get that that trapping is going on. They don't get that it's actually somewhat natural for our planet to have a certain amount of CO2. And that's why we have life on this planet. So this is really a fantastic way when you're in any discussion with anybody, it doesn't matter who they are, a young person or the CEO of some big firm who's in a stage of climate change denial, just go for the greenhouse effect and see what happens from there on in. And I think you'll find most of them won't be able to tell you what it is. And when you inform them, then you can ask them what happens if you add more CO2 or subtract more CO2, and then point out to them that adding more CO2 to the atmosphere means that the global mean surface temperature must increase. It must increase if you're doing that. Now, there are other factors that can cause it to decrease or increase even more. But that's for a later discussion. Right now, just stick with that basic model, and you'll find that 99.9% of people who deny climate change, you'll be able to shift their thinking just by getting them to understand the greenhouse effect, which is why it's taught at school. We learn about this at school. And it's why younger people are more likely to accept that climate change is real than older people who forget about it and are then misled into rejecting that there is climate change that is man-made. They basically think it's all a hoax, or a conspiracy, or scientists have just made it up. But always bring it back to the greenhouse effect, and you'll be able to penetrate through that veil of ignorance. Thank you for joining us again at the Irish Loaf channel. I appreciate it. Please do like and subscribe. It helps me, it helps the channel. You have a nice day. Take care. Bye bye.